So welcome to Midweek, Experiments in Faithfulness. This is a weekly facilitated spiritual practice with a Quaker flavor and an experimental ethos. My name is Jen, and I'm the program manager here at Beacon Hill Friends House. The Friends House is a Quaker center for learning and action and a residential community of about 20 people who live according to Quaker values. And tonight we have Wess Daniels with the practice, Reading the Bible with Empathy. Are you new to reading the Bible? Are you unsure or even resistant to it? Did you know that there are some specific ways that Quakers have read the Bible throughout the ages that open up biblical text in ways that are liberatory and transformative for both the inward self and the outward community? Join us tonight as we practice reading the Bible with empathy. So now I'm excited to introduce you to Wess. So Wess Daniels is a father, author, minister, and Quaker educator at Guilford College. His work primarily relates to renewing faith communities in the face of the empire. His most recent book is Resisting Empire, the Book of Revelation as Resistance. And you can find him on Twitter at @CWessDaniels, which I'm putting in the chat now. Or check out his newsletter at newsletter.remixingfaith.com. So again, welcome. We're happy that you've joined us, and Wess, it is all yours.
Thank you, Jen. Hi, friends. Good evening. It's nice to see so many of you. It's nice to see some friends I haven't seen in a while as well. And thanks for inviting me to come and talk to you a little bit about reading the Bible with empathy. So I am trying to remember. I see Phoebe is here. I'm trying to remember if this is something that we did together when you were still at Guilford or not, but probably besides Phoebe and Greg, this may be new to some of you. And if it's not new, maybe there'll be something new that you can sort of find in this as well. So if you are able to get to the chat in Zoom, I would love to have you post an emoji of what comes up for you when you think about reading the Bible. So find an emoji that reflects your own feelings around that or experience, and just, we can kind of watch that stream. I want to say that I know that, especially when speaking to a group of Quakers, that we are all over the place when it comes to the Bible. Some of you may be very familiar and read it regularly. Some of you maybe have no experience or have very negative or even hurtful experiences with it. So I understand that, and as somebody working with college students, this is absolutely part of what so many of my students bring into the classroom as well, is a mixed bag around the Bible. Today, this evening, as Jen mentioned, I want to try to offer a tool, a way of looking at it. Hopefully, you'll find something in here that could be helpful for you in this practice of reading the Bible. It's rooted in the way that I believe friends have read the Bible throughout time. So it's sort of gonna take us in that direction. So I'm gonna review our emojis. I don't like emojis, but I love reading the Bible. That's great. Okay. So before we get into this exercise of reading the Bible with empathy, I'd like for you to take a look at this little drawing, and there's in the chat, there's a web page or kind of a document that I put together for you, and this is on here. So if you want to go back later and do some work on this, you can use that image, you can print it out, or whatever would be easy. But I want you to think about the lenses that we read the Bible with. So when we go to, let's say we're going to pick it up and start reading it, we don't just read it neutrally. right? We don't read it objectively. We bring a lot of ourselves into that text. So it might be our social identities. So what are the social identities that you carry with you? How and what I present to the world about myself. Some of those identities you have control over, some of them you don't. So what would those identities be? And how might those identities play into the way that you experience reading the Bible? A second thing is to think about your commitments, your values. So what do I choose for myself to be committed to pay attention to? What are my moral responsibilities? So some of my social identities: I'm white, I'm male, I'm cisgendered, I'm heterosexual, I live in the American Empire, I am a father, I grew up in a poor working class family. There's a variety of things, experiences and identities, some that are apparent on the surface, some maybe less so, that are just a part of who I am. And I want to suggest that those identities, and whatever yours are, have an impact on how you read the Bible, how you see the entire world, right? I mean, I don't think that this is a controversial statement to make, but it is. But I want to name it explicitly that those things are also at play when we read the Bible. And the same goes for our commitment. So I'm a Quaker. I became a Quaker in a programmed evangelical yearly meeting, but I have traversed many different Quaker communities over the last 20 plus years that I've been a friend. I am committed to doing my own work to be anti-racist. So that's a commitment that's important to me. I'm committed to a kind of an anti-poverty approach to the world. So I want to live in such a way that, I'm supporting anti-poverty movements, bringing an end, not just alleviating poverty, but eliminating it. So those are some of my commitments, and you have lots of them. So what would some of those things be? And those are going to impact also how I interact with this. And then the last piece would be my, I guess my community or tradition. My tradition would be Quakerism, Christianity, that sort of thing. But my commitments might be nonviolence, so that kind of, I need to aggregate that a little bit more. But how does your community or communities that you're a part of impact the way that you read this and your tradition? So these are all sort of, if we had a little bit more time, I would invite you to sort of reflect on these things. And then after we did that, I want you to think about what the lenses are that the Bible brings to you. How does the Bible read you, right? Because the Bible is a text that's written over the course of at least 600 years and represents about 1,000 years difference. It's 66 different books. It's like an ancient Kindle, right? Or, a little ancient pocket library. So it's all kinds. Some of them are books of poetry. Some of them are books of history. Some of them are books of mythology. Some of them are biographies. Some of them are letters that were written to one community or another, dealing with certain things, all packed into this little ancient library. And so it doesn't have a singular voice. It has multiple identities, multiple communities, multiple commitments and values that it brings to us. And I want to suggest that we don't always know what those things are on the face of them either. And sometimes we have to work at understanding that history. So thinking about that interplay between how we read and how it reads us is an important piece of getting into and trying to be empathetic. If I, Wes, go to the Bible looking for a white male, I'm not going to find anybody. It's going to be right. But if I'm going to try to read it empathetically, what do I need to do to try to imaginatively try to get into the story a little bit, to try to understand maybe, it's some way what was happening there to the people who don't represent me or my experience. So this is kind of the exercise. I hope that generally makes sense. We're going to try it out so you'll get to see it a little bit more. All right. So when we think about the Bible, I wanted to kind of share a couple statements about different perspectives of maybe how to think about what the Bible is about at a very big picture level. Howard Thurman, probably many of you are familiar with Howard Thurman, was a Black Baptist preacher, civil rights activist, mystic, friend of friends, that sort of thing, a close confidant of Martin Luther King Jr. In fact, it's said that Martin Luther King Jr. Carried, let's see, I think I got a copy here, carried this book in his briefcase alongside the Bible and the Constitution. This is what Howard Thurman's book, Jesus and the Disinherited. Howard Thurman writes Jesus and the Disinherited because he says the way that white Christianity is interpreting and understanding the Bible, and especially Jesus, is wrong, is misinformed, because it is not understanding that Jesus in these texts are written not by the powerful, not by the good guy, like where we sort of read ourselves into. I heard somebody recently say that American Christianity sort of sees itself as Israel rather than Rome, biblical Israel rather than biblical Rome, right? So, okay. So Howard Thurman is saying something like that. He's saying, we white Christian, American Christians have read the Bible as though they're a part, the centerpiece of the story, when in fact Jesus was himself a poor person whose back was against the wall. And we need to understand that that's what these stories are primarily about before we can begin to understand them. So this is his quote. A few of these interpretations of Jesus in the Bible deal with the teachings and life of Jesus, have to say with those who stand at this moment in human history with their backs against the wall. So what does it mean to have an interpretation or to read the Bible in a way that is empathetic with those whose backs are against the wall? So that's the first part. The Reverend Dr. Liz Theo Harris, who is the co-chair of the Poor People's Campaign now, and does a lot of work around reading the Bible with the poor, which is certainly an aspect of reading it with empathy. She says that she sees and understands the Bible to be a collection of stories of poor people uniting across difference to build a social movement and winning. So I'm putting these two sort of quotes up to start to try to open up. If we were to begin to read the Bible empathetically, that this is the direction I want to suggest that we might be going in, is seeing that these texts are not about people who look like me, are not about people who, the Christian nationalists who storm the Capitol and want to claim those symbols for themselves. It's not about them. It's not about us. It's about these communities of people who were themselves living under various empires: Rome, Babylon, Persia, Asia, Egypt. It's about them. And so if we want to get into this story, we have to understand that that's the sort of position that these communities are in. Okay, so shifting towards this empathetic view and getting into the Quaker piece of this. So the late T. Vale Palmer Jr., who was a Quaker theologian, he was a CO during the Korean War, was imprisoned because of that, and has written over the course of maybe the last 30 years of his career, he's been writing about how he understood early friends to read the Bible. And Vail says that the way that he describes it is that early friends read the Bible empathetically, that they saw themselves in the story. They were trying to understand the story first from the perspective of those who who experienced it, but early Quakers, as you know, were themselves people who were heavily persecuted, who in many ways were themselves up against a wall, standing in opposition to the religion of empire of their day. And because of that, they had certain affinities with the text that we may be missing in a much more comfortable environment. So this is what Vail says: for Fox and Fell, the biblical history was indeed the history of their own time. Every player in the drama of 17th century England had a counterpart in the biblical drama of the people of God and its enemies. And he goes on to describe that and talk about, and I should have his books easily referenceable, but I don't. So maybe we can get that in the chat. He's published two. He was able to publish 2 of 3 books on friends reading the Bible. He died. He actually just passed away a few weeks ago before publishing the 3rd one. Anyways, they're worth reading. Thank you for sharing that, Jen. He was a very good friend of mine. I'm essentially sort of taking his idea and trying to kind of build on it. So he saw early friends as reading the Bible with empathy. So how do we do that? So in the last, I'm going to go fast because we have about 9 minutes, and I want us to try this out. So I want to cover some of the ways that either early friends read the Bible with empathy, or how we can do that. Okay, so it's to read the Bible with empathy is understanding the text, the content, the history, and the context enough that you can imaginatively sort of put yourself into that story and begin to understand it in a new way. And so here are some of the tactics. The first tactic or strategy is to read off center. And that is to read from the margins. So you may, again, I can't necessarily on my own read from the margins, but I can either, when I read the text, I can look for who are the people in this story who represent those in power, and who are those in the text that I'm reading who represent the powerless, right? Where's the margins? Where's the center? That sort of thing. So, and when I read the text, I can look for that and begin to sort of tease out the dynamics around power and privilege in that aspect. Or I can read the text with other people in my own community who have been marginalized, who are not, who are experiencing injustice, who are the poor, right? Who are disenfranchised or have their backs against the wall in some way. So these are 2 ways in which I can read or work to read off center. We read off center when out of a kind of a motivation for looking around for dealing with questions of social justice. Okay, so Elizabeth Schuster Fiorenza is a feminist biblical scholar writing about the book of Revelation. She says, this reading strategy searches through the Bible and Revelation for a language of hope and a paradigm of liberation from a world of poverty and oppression. So to read, what does it mean to read the book of Revelation off center? And so she's suggesting this is how you would do this. Are there keys within this text that tell us something about liberation? A more contemporary example is Martin Luther King Jr.'s letter from a Birmingham prison, where he is writing a letter from the margins, both as a Black man, pre-civil rights, as well as in prison. And he's writing that to moderate white Southern Christian clergy. And so this is that text, what needs to be understood as itself having been written from off center and needing to be read in that direction. So this might be an example that we have of one kind of modern text. Okay, the second mode is tapestry. So another way of kind of getting into the story of these biblical texts is to look for places where language is woven, stories are woven together, symbols. When you see the word lamb, lamb shows up. Real lambs show up. Lots of shepherds all over the place in the Bible. Symbolic lambs show up. I mean, so this is a part of tapestry. It's something that's woven through the text, so that when we get to the book of Revelation and we talk about the lamb that was slain, it's sort of like hint, hint, wink, wink. All of biblical history is packed into this one little lamb in Revelation. So we need to sort of understand that history and that the ways that the biblical writers knew their tradition very well and were able to weave it into what they were saying. So where are the echoes in the text? Lots of places where, can you still hear me? It looks like my
your audio went out when you said Jesus and then came back.
Whoa. Okay. Yeah, I can tell that my headset went away. That's okay. We don't need
Just very quickly. It wasn't that long.
So where are the echoes? Jesus was really good at sort of weaving in these biblical stories from the Hebrew tradition. Okay, so and part of the reason why you use tapestry is because it's a clue to your audience, like, oh, he's referencing that set of material. Oh, he used that lamb image. That lamb image, it doesn't just mean a lamb, it means all this extra stuff. So it's a way to sort of pull people in. We look for stories, images, language, and metaphors in the Bible. This method is about leaving traces or hints of the old woven into the new, so as to establish common ground and a shared sense of authority and continuity. George Fox, early Quakers in general, Margaret Fell was very good at this. George Fox, he was a college professor's nightmare, plagiarizing all over the place, never citing anything at all. This is one thing, one little excerpt from an epistle. Since sing and rejoice, you children of the day and of the light, for the Lord is at the work in this thick night of darkness that may be felt, and truth does flourish as the rose, and on and on and on. And how many times do you think he committed plagiarism in this little piece of text? At least 7 times. And he's weaving in this language that his hearers, who, if they had a book at all in their home, it was a Bible. And so they knew this language, they knew these images. And this is a way of Fox making the biblical story his own and putting it into his own words and weaving it together to say we're together in this. A third tactic is remix. So I won't say too much about remix because I think probably most of you have some idea of what it is. It's when you take something old and something new and you sort of put it together. But remix is a way to pay homage to the past while creating something new. So remix comes from hip hop culture. It's a method of reinventing the old. And while remix in that language comes from hip hop culture, this is something that has been done by many names prior to that. And the Bible is itself chocked full of remixes. And the book of Revelation is itself quite a grand remix in a lot of ways. Here's some contemporary examples. This is probably not that contemporary anymore. I'm dating myself, but this is a remix, the Romeo and Juliet, where they use the Shakespearean language, but they're in like modern day LA. This is an image of a Picasso and then Bob Dylan trying to draw a Picasso, as in Bob Dylan's album called Self-Portrait, Picasso's painting called Self-Portrait. So it's sort of a homage and a remix of sorts. The book of Revelation, when I say that it's a remix, it is drawing. So this is chapter 18. On the left hand, you see the verses from chapter 18. On the right hand, and this is kind of like tapestry too. You can see how the tapestry is sort of woven in, but there's all these places where the biblical, where Hebrew texts and images are being woven in. And we'll need more time to talk about Revelation at another point. But Revelation 18 is the single most scathing critique of systemic economics that create poverty that could be found probably in the entire Bible. Revelation 18 is about an economics that creates impoverishment, poverty. And it talks about, in fact, that the Roman Empire in that time was enslaving humans. And so this is why God is going to bring judgment on the empires, because they're enslaving human bodies. So from the first century Christian scriptures, you have a systemic critique of slavery. And that is very powerful and sad to have been cloaked and hidden and sort of made into a joke for thousands of years so that Christians could go and do something else other than follow that. But when John writes this, he is pulling on his Hebrew tradition to say that all the weight of the prophets come to bear on this moment, on this critique of empire. It's not just me having a problem with the way Rome does business. It's the entire Hebrew tradition or prophetic tradition I'm bringing with me. That's remix, that kind of building on the master, so to speak. Okay, I know we got to get into our practice here. So this is Margaret Fell from her classic Women Speaking Justified. The very last line, I love this. I mean, it is just straight up remix. Fell's closing lines in this pamphlet, Women Speaking Justified, plays off the First Timothy quote from Paul, which says, "Let a woman learn in silence with all subjection. But I suffer not a woman to teach, nor to usurp authority over the man, but to be in silence." By turning it back around on her opponents, Fell suggests that they should remain silent when she says, "So let all mouths be stopped that would limit him whose power and spirit is infinite, that is pouring upon all flesh." So she sort of takes this and kind of turns it, remixes it. All right. The very last one is essentially embodying the story. So acting it out is sort of godly play for adults. So you can embody the story. And by that, I literally mean, like, if it's, if you're reading the Good Samaritan and there's three people, have three people and have them act it out, and see how embodying the story in some way changes the way we understand it. This is the image from the first Poor People's Campaign in '68, when you had caravans coming across the country, and there was a mule train coming up from Marks, Mississippi, that said, "Don't laugh, folks, Jesus was a poor man." Now, this is a reenactment of Jesus's triumphal entry into Jerusalem. There's a classic Quaker story about that, where James Naylor rides a donkey into Bristol, reenacting the triumphal entry of Jesus. For Naylor, as well for civil rights folks, reenacting these things often doesn't go over very well. because there is a power in that. This is the Greensboro sit-ins, another sort of form of embodying embodying the story of justice, if you will. So I'm going to stop there, and we'll skip over a few of these things. Go here to the practice. All right, so let's take a break or take a breath. That was a lot, but the slides are all there on that webpage, so you can go back and refresh your mind. There's the 4. We talked about 4. We skipped over the last one, where you're essentially reading it in community and in sort of creating the space where many voices interpret the text. So that's for another time. But these 4, I want you to try out for the next 15 minutes to read one of these passages. Luke 10. I tried to pick kind of ones that are maybe a little bit known by more folks just to make it a little easier. So pick one of these texts, read it, and then just have a discussion about one of these tactics. What would it be like to remix the feeding of the multitude? What would a remix reading be? Is there any tapestry in the feeding? How would we read this off center? So just have that conversation. So pick one text, and then you can talk about one tactic, or you can talk about as many as you want, and just try to kind of wrestle with what would it look like to read this text through one of these practices. Does that sound good? Let's try it out.